Welcome everyone to the webinar. We're so excited to have you all here today. Legal professionals are no strangers to busy days, an influx of requests, tasks, questions, all sorts of things throughout the organization. And you're likely all on this call because you find yourself doing a lot in many of these things, but maybe you don't know quite how to organize them, or you don't know exactly how to prove the results or prove really your impact that you have on the organization. Or maybe you're looking for a fresh perspective on how legal works cross-functionally, so you can take that back to your organization after this call today. Either way, we're here to help. Well, actually, Krista and Crystal are here to help you today. I'm here to just kind of moderate and be here as a soundboard. I'm Mary. I am our growth marketing manager here at Link Squares. Thank you all for joining. I'm excited that you're all here to join and tune in today. And then I'm going to have Crystal and Krista introduce themselves as well. And I'd love to hear what your day-to-days look like. Krista, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mary. Nice to be working with you again for another webinar. I am Krista Russell. I am the head of legal for the supply chain organization at Airbus US Space and Defense. My company is, at least my part of the company, in addition to what you probably know of as traditional Airbus, we are responsible for the space operations. For Airbus, that's largely government activities and preparing satellites and other spacecraft for our customers. In my role, I manage the transactional activities mostly of our supply chain. That's the largest part of my role, as well as just providing legal support throughout the organization as it may be required. It's sort of like a corporate generalist.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Crystal.
Hi, everyone. And Mary, it's a pleasure to work with you on my inaugural Lake Squares speaker role.
We're happy to have
I
you.
am an assistant general counsel at ETS. ETS is a global education and talent solutions organization that is focused on building fair and valid assessments. Our portfolio includes some of the world's most trusted assessments, including the GREs, the Praxis family of exams, the TOEFL, and the TOEIC examinations. And all of this is premised on the goal of promoting upward mobility, licensure, and just expansion and accessibility to opportunities. And my day-to-day workflow really depends on which type of high-profile transactions I am navigating or leading. If I'm working on an asset purchase agreement, some type of acquisition, a member substitution agreement, I am working around the clock with our key stakeholders to complete due diligence, work on the agreement, negotiate with our counterparties, and execute the agreement. Now, when I'm not working on that type of deal, I'm also supporting legal transitional service agreements and other operational agreements. I would say the bulk of my work is global transactions. However, I support compliance categories and other items as they arise. So never a dull moment. And it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy my practice in-house.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So, while this is a fun little meme here, it actually kind of talks about what Crystal and Krista just mentioned, that legal is doing a lot of different things. This is certainly not an exhaustive list we have here, but each of their day-to-days are so different. And so it's clear that in a legal role, it can be so variable. So I'd love to talk a little bit further about, dive a little deeper, I guess, into each of your roles. And Chris, I'll hear from you what the overview of the various functions that the legal team handles. I know a favorite lawyer answer is it depends, but I'd love to hear about yours specifically.
Well, regarding my role at ETS, it's pretty expansive in that I am supporting global transactional work, but the type of transactions and the subject matter of these transactions are really diverse. It varies on the business need, and my role as an assistant general counsel is to advance that business need by providing my counsel, by using and leveraging my expertise, and also leveraging my relationships with different business partners to get that project done or to get that agreement done. And the types of agreements that we've seen, as I mentioned in my intro, are commercial focused, right? We're looking at security purchase agreements, we're looking at master service agreements, we're working at some type of nonprofit oriented transaction. Regardless of that agreement, however, there's a few touch points that I always do in my operations as AGC. And one of them is consultant fact find, right? You work with your business partners to understand what the purpose of the deal is, any monetary thresholds, and understanding really what that subject matter is. If it's something governing data, right? Understanding any security concerns and understanding and working with your IT partners to understand what you need to include in that agreement. We're looking at IP matters. We're looking at licensing agreements. Branding and use of your logo is something that we look into in my role when we're looking at what kind of protections need to be afforded to the organization in the transaction. Now, compliance is also something that I've touched upon it both in this role and in my previous roles prior to ETS. And it really depends on your organization, whether you're overseeing compliance functions. So one thing to make note is, you will have a diverse workflow, but the categories that you cover may depend on the size of your entity, your reporting structure, and whether or not you are covering corporate governance or compliance per se. Compliance may look like, retail, manufacturing, consumer good, regulatory compliance, or it could be something like digital accessibility, which is some of the stuff that I've done here at ETS because the product is so customer facing and tech facing. And, there are several contracts that one can also handle from an operational and supply chain standpoint, which I know Krista has a lot of experience in. So wondering if you want to chime in, Krista, on any of the cross-functional work that you've been doing on contracts at Airbus.
Yeah, and I think we'll also touch on this as we kind of work through our presentation. But to the extent that we can pull it in now, yes, let's do that, right? We often look at legal as like the center point of of a transaction, and that's not just because we are the party that is all of the other cross-functional relationships, but it's also because while we are subject matter experts in the law, we are also expected to become experts in engineering and technical facing matters and finance and any real interdepartmental like functions throughout the company. So it's our job to kind of weave those together to come up with sort of a comprehensive, cohesive deal at the end of the day. In my role over here at Airbus, in addition to those like transactional matters, like Crystal mentioned, a lot of things that we touch on, and we have a small legal department. In fact, Airbus US does not have a traditional legal department. There's not a general counsel, although there are lawyers that work throughout the company. In fact, about half of our C-suite are recovering lawyers, if you will. And so there's a very high value placed on legal subject matter experts that wear non-legal hats to provide strategic support for the company and in its future business operations. Crystal mentioned really furthering business objectives. And as lawyers, particularly in-house counsel, I find it's our job to go through that investigatory process as we're working through a deal, but also if it's not a deal, if we're working on launching a new business product, if we're working on, strategic support for just an internal audit or process or due diligence as we're pursuing acquisitions. Like our job is beyond the subject matter expert of the law. We are asked to really contribute and look, across all of these varying aspects because as lawyers, most people believe that we're uniquely positioned to do so. And I know certainly in my experience, this is coming up to my 15th year practicing in-house. And in that time, I have never worn a hat of just a lawyer, right? We're always tasked with so much more than that. And that's, I think it's a good thing that the role of legal in-house has changed over the last half century or so, because it gives us the opportunity, which most of us want, where most of us are business people at heart, to have a seat at the decision-making table. That's contrasted from a private practice, whereas you might be tasked to foresee consequences, analyze the law, foreshadow risks, but not necessarily have an opinion in what the decision is forward. Here in the in-house community, the reason legal is often the glue is because we are uniquely positioned to weave together all of those various contingencies and potential consequences and come up with an objective opinion as to a path forward.
100% agree, Krista. And I think that as part of the evolved role of in-house counsel, we're also sought as a thought leader, but also someone that helps align the business with the North Star of the business. Like, what is the ultimate objective or goal? Sometimes it's legal just reeling everyone in to make sure we're still focused on that objective and the reason why we're all in the room.
Right.
I have a question about that. How do you refocus if it goes outside of the scope? Like Crystal, you were just talking about that.
Well, I find, and we'll go into this a little bit further in the next slide, I find that communication is key with all relevant stakeholders and making sure that everyone is aligned in whatever the objective may be. So if I find that we're getting off track or we're losing sight of what the original intent of the deal is, gathering a call with all of the relative points for that deal, it's necessary and it helps streamline the process, right? The goal is to make the transaction as painless and efficient as possible. And rather than starting an email chain, it's just great to have everyone in the same call or room just to hammer out the details. I find that just picking up the phone is sometimes the most effective way to get through to the other party, who sometimes is moving in a different direction due to a misunderstanding or perhaps not understanding one of the back end counterpieces that they haven't yet been exposed to.
I might add to that sometimes the refocusing work can only happen if the legwork has been done in advance, right? So as in-house counsel, reliability, dependability, predictability in what you're going to get from us is really, really key to forming that trust in the relationship. And that happens before it ever starts to go off track, right? That happens from the responsiveness to email communications and timely acknowledgement of issues that need, addressed from your business stakeholders. Ultimately, at the end of the day, in order to be effective, to be either the glue or the ringleader for a transaction or whatever it doesn't have to be a transaction, of course, like whatever it might be, in order to be effective at that work already has to take place, outside of that particular meeting. So yes, absolutely to what Crystal said, but also recognizing that so much of that comes from the daily interactions and practice that lead up to it.
Definitely. And there are lots of responsibilities. And then also that's kind of how you build those cross-functional relationships. Krista, I know you want to dive into really the how of building these relationships. First the how, then why it's so important. So I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, we've talked, Mary, you and I in the past, and there's been much conversation, whether it's on LinkedIn or other thought leadership spaces, on how legal can get to know the business and understand the business. In fact, I think we've done at least one webinar on what that means. Like, how do you learn the business, right? And rather than like you can't put as an objective, understand the business, because what does that actually mean, right? So part of understanding our business and being effective in it is getting to know the people. It's deep diving into the various interdepartments that within your company, right? It's understanding what margins look like. It's getting to know who the competitors are and in what space and what your competitive advantage is over them. Things that have nothing to do with a traditional legal function. Crystal, I can't remember the phrase you used, but it was some sort of like investigatory, like work, that follows some sort of initial triage where you're really asking the questions, right? As lawyers, we're inherently curious. We love to poke holes and to find, different ways to do things. And part of that curiosity is really in those initial conversations and getting to know what is happening. It's talking to people, not just in the hallways, but, before or after a call starts, and just understanding what they do, how that impacts, a particular deal, what they bring, why a particular competitor did not win a contract, and your company did. What was it that made them lose? What was it that made you win, right? So it's your people. It's your best asset in any company is always your people. It's not your product, although you can have a great product, but it's really understanding that institutional knowledge that you can get from your colleagues and asking these questions. Doing so is not just a selfish motive so that you can do your job better. Obviously, it also protects the company from your risk mitigation standpoint, and it also leads to better deals because you have to understand it in order to effectively negotiate or draft a contract that would be the best deal for your company. So by working through all of that, you have an internal benefit of your own performance, you have an external benefit for your company, and then you also have that underlying piece that I was just alluding to in the previous slide, which is the responsiveness, the predictability, the relationship based on trust, where your counterparts in your company want to proactively come seek you out for a project. Things that might not even have anything to do with a deal or a particular legal matter. They want to know your opinion because you've expressed interest. You have asked questions that got them thinking. You've contributed in ways that make make their deals better, make them feel more secure in moving forward in a particular project, and ultimately always with the objective of getting to yes, right? Achieving the business objectives, not being a roadblock. And I think we don't really have to talk too much anymore about legal not being a roadblock. Everybody understands why that's so important. However, we have to acknowledge, right, that has been historically a part of in-house professional practice, that legal is where you went for deals to die, for people to say no, and for everything to kind of implode. And so now, while we don't have as much reputational damage to do anymore, we do have to recognize that history.
Yeah, I have a question actually about that. I know you mentioned asking questions so that they know you're invested. Do you have specific questions that you ask to let them know that you are invested in their deals just as much as they are?
To be honest with you, I don't have a list. It's possible I could probably come up with one if I sat for a few minutes, but
Yeah.
really, I believe to show genuine interest, and I'm not showing interest because I'm trying to get brownie points with a particular stakeholder. I'm showing interest because I care and I want to understand. My husband thinks that's crazy. He thinks that like the amount of questions that I ask on a daily basis is insane. Wait till my kids turn into teenagers. That will be a great asset and he'll be grateful for that, right? But that's how we are as lawyers, right? We are asking these questions. We go through, and I take this approach, and I start anytime I work with a new business person that's not used to me. I let them know that while listening is the most important thing that I will do in that conversation, I will interrupt them because they will start going down a path, and I will think of 4 questions that I need to understand from that. So it's really active listening. It's almost like litigation listening, where you're listening to what the other side is offering as an argument, but you're listening to respond, not necessarily listening to learn. When I'm doing these investigatory interviews at the beginning of a triage process, at the beginning of a deal, I'm asking questions to understand. Okay, so then what's the worst thing that can happen? When I also teach law school at the University of Miami School of Law, a transactional skills class. And what I teach my students in that class as we go to draft deals is I always ask, what's the worst thing that can happen? Or what if they don't? What if the other party doesn't do that? Like walk through the steps that would happen after that. Okay, and what if they don't deliver the product on time? Okay, then X, Y, and Z happens. And then what if they don't come together for the 30-day cure period? Like what is the rippling effect down the line? So most of my questions start with like that kind of lens, and then it's just a natural evolution. I listen, I ask a question about whatever they just said, and sometimes that takes me on a completely different path. Sometimes it hijacks the conversation for a period of time just as I'm trying to understand, but genuine curiosity comes from active listening. And for me, active listening is not just letting my business partner go on for 30 minutes, not that there's anything wrong with that. It actually means like asking questions, being responsive, just like you would have a conversation.
Great. Crystal, do you have anything to add about like how you go about fostering cross-functional relationships?
Well, Crystal was pretty comprehensive in breaking down how to build it and the need for building these cross-functional relationships. And I really wanted to harp on um, the antiquated notion that legal is a cost center. I think that the way, and I always explain this to my business clients, we are a cost saving center and we are a value creator. And these cross functional relationships that we're driving are pivotal in making sure these deals happen quickly and that we understand who needs to be involved in the conversation from the beginning. If you have all of the relevant parties at the table from the start, you'd be surprised at how quickly and painlessly these deals can be completed. And I think that our agility and our ability to pivot is one of the hallmarks of an effective in-house attorney. And so this conversation on the cross-functional relationships, yes, on a selfish side, it's necessary. So because you need to know what you're doing, but it's also one of your value adds as an attorney for the company. And so, there's always a 30, 60, 90-day plan when you start in a new company. I think the primary objective for an onboarded attorney is meeting your business partners, setting up that one-on-one, whether virtual or coffee in person. It is pivotal to establishing the relationships you need to learn about the company because without that institutional knowledge, you're going to hit some roadblocks and you're going to take longer than needed for agreements. And, our metrics, and we're going to go into that later on in our presentation, is our customer service. And if we don't know our client, we won't be able to serve our customer to the best of our abilities and in alignment with our legal duties as in-house counsel.
Absolutely. And just another thing that legal is responsible for is helping marketing, advertising, and those vendor relationships. So we have the internal relationships, right? But then there also has to be that ability to also work outside of the company. Krista, I know you have responsibilities either now or previously that relates to this, and I'd love to hear about your experience and what it means to ensure that legal's meeting business standards, and then how vendor relationships are tied into the day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important, like an important distinction that we can just start off with, right? We can spend, however long in this presentation, and I can give you like a step-by-step how to review marketing collateral for compliance with various regulations. And that's all good and well, but you can probably also find that through like a quick how-to search on the internet, right? What I really want to focus on as we explore this is where can you bring in value? Not just how can you do the checkbox, right? What are the 10 things that you look at when you're reviewing a particular kind of agreement, IT, human resources, whatever it might be, right? But it's where does the value come in? And I think, as I always teach my students, right, you will be a great attorney, not just a good attorney, if you're able to look at the business deal as a whole, right? If you're not just looking at, okay, what's the indemnification clause say in this agreement? And why is indemnification important in a marketing agreement? Like, you really need to step outside of the legal box that we have been trained in and look at to what this deal means for the company. We always talk about lawyers being firefighters, right? Like we come in and like we're just putting out fires left and right. And I actually don't like that analogy. I like to look at myself as like a general contractor. Like I'm coming in and I'm building, right? Yes, I can put out fires, no problem. But I'm also coming in and I'm laying out the plans. I'm the architect, right? I'm the plumber and I'm like the tradesman and I'm in there and like doing the nitty gritty work, and I'm building the buildings as well. So when it comes to marketing, advertising, vendor relations, or really any broader segment of non-revenue generating contracts, like where we bring value in is by thinking what we're trying to accomplish. One of my favorite examples in a true like marketing advertising partnership, Mary, actually from Tim Perla, when he gave an example, I think it was on a podcast interview, that he talked about when he was with a particular company, they were doing advertising for Major League Baseball. And they were signing a contract whereby they would advertise their particular product anytime between the first inning and the ninth inning. And that's okay, great. You can come in as a lawyer and you can review that agreement and go through your standard clauses and liability and what if it doesn't. And then you have a great lawyer like Tim that comes in and says, okay, but the game starts at 7. Maybe not a lot of people are watching at 7 o'clock because they're still coming home from work, eating dinner, whatnot. And maybe by the ninth inning, it's a blowout game and really everyone's turned it off and has put on Law and Order if it was me. Okay. So maybe I really want to focus on getting my company the most bang for my buck by really narrowing this agreement to like, okay, yes, play your ad whenever you want, but it should be maybe between the third and the sixth inning when the most people would be watching the game. And when he gave this example, it's the best example I can think of coming in, stepping beyond the box of what are the terms and conditions and how can I make this deal better, right? There's a classic Harvard law school negotiation, or sorry, Harvard Business Review negotiation fact pattern called Sally Soprano. It's a very simple negotiation. Most law students go through it at some point, where you're negotiating a salary for an opera singer, and the opera house has lost their leading soprano, and they have 3 weeks to get like a new lead role. And then the lead role, Sally, has not performed in a couple years. She would perform for free because she's so excited just to like get back in there. And that you watch, and I do this with my students every semester, and you like negotiate like, oh, $40,000, $30,000. And it's not about the money, right? They need her, she needs them. And I always challenge my students through this example to, where can you add value? Okay, listen, what does the opera house need? They need to sell tickets and they need a lead singer. Okay, what does the opera singer need? She wants exposure. So what can we do? Let's talk about, classes at the opera house that she can offer for other people, that where she doesn't even get paid, but she's getting more exposure. A free concert outside of the opera hall, Instagram stories promoting, like all of these things that have mutual benefit, that don't cost either party a single cent or very little money for what they would get from it. But like, you have to think beyond, how do I negotiate the best salary? How do I get a limitation of liability that is 2x factor, the actual cost of the annual fees, like most of us do. That's where good lawyers make great deals, because we come in and we add value beyond the traditional thing. So as it pertains to marketing, advertising, like these kinds of agreements, we have to do the same thing. Where can we bring in the most value for our company? Forget what's written on the paper. Forget the deal terms that are already negotiated. Think beyond that. And that is really, I'm sure in your experience, Mary, like being in the marketing segment at Link Squares, like you are dealing with lawyers who are making your deals better because they step outside of like the two things that you ask them to do. It's not early in my career, I used to hate when someone would send me a deal and be like, hey, can you look at these 3 lines? Okay, like just because they would like, hey, I'm a lawyer, I can look at everything I want, right? I hate that now for a completely different reason, because I think that minimizes what I can actually bring to the deal. Not because my business team isn't smart, not because they didn't think of it, but because I've been uniquely trained over the course of law school in the last 15 years to find ways to make both parties win, right? And that's why it's always getting to yes for us. We're always trying to make it better. So that to me is where the real benefit lies in being an in-house counsel, when you can take beyond what you were asked to do and just make it better for both sides, particularly for your company.
Definitely. It's so funny that you say that too, because I know our legal team does take a comprehensive look at every vendor agreement and marketing collateral that we have. And they think about things that I would not even, bat an eyelash at. Krista, I'm curious how you think outside the box. What are those things that you do that maybe you're just looking at through a different lens?
I would love to, again, tell you, like, I have this recipe, right? And I think some of it has just been baptism by fire as I've, grown over the course of my career. But I bring in just a level of confidence in my ability to ask questions. I'm not going to ever say I'm the smartest or best lawyer in any room. In fact, I was very much on the bottom half of my law school class, and unapologetically so, because I knew what I was trying to do. But where the path that I go down is just simply like, how can I make this better? It's just, okay, this is what's in front of me, without costing any party any money most of the time. Like, where can I go to add value to this deal? So value to me in the Tim example with the MLB game is like, okay, I'm paying X amount of money for advertising, right? We're in the middle of a presidential campaign season, right? There's all sorts of crazy amount of money being spent on ads. If I was in a company like that and I was trying to negotiate an ad spend, with one of the major news networks, like, how can I get the most value? Would I want to tie that to a particular advertisement that went before it? If I'm selling some sort of pharmaceutical product, do I really not want it to be after a Doritos ad? Like, I don't know. It just depends on like what the actual deal you're trying to work is. Here in the space business, like, I'm always thinking about, what if we don't get to launch? Like, what if my product is sitting? Like, how is that affecting my warranty? Because usually in my company, at least with our satellites, we have a bunch of different components that we have an assembly line here that we manufacture together. But as soon as we touch those components, our warranty is clicking, right? Because that's when they're manipulated. And like, so what if we don't get to launch? What if the product is sitting? Does that affect the overall lifespan? And then I get to like ways that I can try to bring that in. It's not costing anybody any money, But hey, like we have a COVID situation where the world kind of shuts down, or with this very real situation that happened to us where our project was kind of hijacked and stuck in Russia after the Ukraine invasion, and we weren't allowed to touch our product. Like just things that you come in and say, where can this get better, right? And it's often beyond the 5 or 6 lead commercial terms. It's
Mhm.
understanding the deal, asking the questions, getting to know the deal so you can figure out how to contribute to make it better, or how to be more protective, right? Like asking my business people what has happened, like where this is went wrong in the past, and then trying to contract various scenarios so that we avoid those kinds of things in the future, because it's not just about the likelihood of something going wrong, it's often about being prepared. Contracts are our way to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So, right, force majeure came into effect in 2020, and most of us were like, well, now we're going to have a lot better force majeure clauses going forward, right? Like the clause that we're just like, okay, check, 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 sure. Now we're going to really negotiate it. So we have to take those lessons learned, even if they're not lessons learned from our company, look at our industry, look beyond, and find ways to make our deals better.
I agree 100%, Krista. We're preemptive rather than reactive, although we'll take certain scenarios and use it as we navigate our agreements going forward. And I do not do marketing agreements, but I thought it'd be prudent to add that, when asking the questions, which is what you should be doing, I think that's what you need to do when you are working in an agreement, especially with a new business partner. Also ask about the company's financial health. Monitor the trends, understand budgeting constraints, right? Is the specific department restricted to XYZ as its budget for the year? Then perhaps the precedent of having that 60-day payment term may not work, or the threshold or the capacity limits for the agreement may not be applicable for that specific business department. So asking questions about what the agreement is, as well as the state of the department and the state of the finances of the company, will also help you better polish that agreement to the benefit of your business partners. And that's something that most of us will say, hey, we had this 30-day billing requirement in the past 5 agreements, so we should be ready to roll with this term. But if you're monitoring the health and the trends of your company, you may know that that department may need to be restructured, or maybe that department is looking to hire, 3 or 4 more leads, which would end up being a significant budget decrease for that particular contract. So ask about any developments and monitor the company news and ask questions about that category as well, because that could also distinguish you from the regular contract attorney to the more in tune attorney that your company slash business needs.
The key here, it sounds like, is to ask questions.
Yes.
Um,
Very
Very
good at that, right? It's just getting that comfort and feeling like it's okay to step beyond what you were asked to do, right?
Now, let's jump into another thing that legal is responsible for. We touched upon this a little bit at the beginning, that IT and compliance side of things. And Crystal, I know this is something that you've had some experience with. So I really would love to hear from you about managing compliance, whether it's on the digital side. I'll start with you about really your role in IT and compliance.
Well, interestingly, at ETS, I don't oversee IT in particular, or IT and cybersecurity risks, right? Where it's handled by our compliance division. But I do have extensive experience in this category because in my past life, I oversaw compliance, and compliance encompassed both physical brick and mortar compliance and website and digital accessibility. And so I can speak to this point in my current role, but also based off of my past experiences working for a Fortune 500 retailer with several locations and a US and Canada and Mexican website. And so when you're managing compliance and managing your legal obligations, there is a necessity to bifurcate these different matters to your business leads, right? You are an advisor and you're advising on the regulations that apply to your business, and you're giving your recommendations. But a lot of the time, your role is to sit at the business table and also explain the pros and cons of going a certain direction. You can tell them this is the risk of doing this, and you can help them weigh what the ultimate decision will be. And your job is to make sure that they're making an informed decision. And so that's something that Krista touched upon earlier, the multiple hats that we wear as legal counsel. Well, this is especially prevalent in the IT and compliance category because it is IT in particular, and privacy and cybersecurity is so heavily regulated, both statewide, internationally, and even countywide. So you are a value driver when you're cognizant of the specific regulations that may apply and when you're asking the questions about the particular touch points where you may have exposure, right? Are you doing business in this state? Are you doing business in this country? Those are different analyses that you must take into consideration. So again, going with your business partner, sitting down and understanding the breadth of this product and the touch points of this product is invaluable in providing that advice as legal counsel. Now, from a digital accessibility perspective, the law is still pretty broad. It's pretty gray, unfortunately, which means that it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And I find that these gray areas are the most challenging for the business to understand. And your role as in-house counsel and your value as in-house counsel is explaining that it's okay that it's ambiguous, right? Our
Mhm.
role is to help you navigate that ambiguity until more clear regulations are available. And how we do this is we monitor legal trends, we monitor case law, we monitor what other businesses are doing. And so here again, you see how comprehensive your legal role is because you're not only looking at the law, you're also doing your research on what other competitors are doing so that whether or not you could go in a certain direction. You could also see if they've been recipients of litigation for compliance matters that you are currently reviewing, and that will help educate your business on what to do and what not to do, and also help you put together a framework of yeses and nos for that particular climate. Now, how you do that is by way of policies and procedures. And you can do that by working with your cross-functional partners to create statements of procedure, right? You want SOPs that break down how to assess a particular compliance exposure and permissive activities and listing accountability, right? Listing those who are responsible for overseeing or managing a particular category or persons who are the thought leaders that you need to go to when you have a question or uncertainty. So in times of ambiguity or uncertainty, giving a clear directive as to who to go to for questions and who to go to for potential problems is what you need to do in those scenarios. And have found that 100% of the time, it not only gives a comfort to the business partners that they've received the legal and compliance advice that they needed, but also gives you a direct line of communication so that in the event that something does go all right, you're one of the first persons they call. And again, you'll be that first person they call if you've built that rapport, if you've built that cross-functional relationship that we were hounding on earlier. And also, if you continue to monitor the trends in your particular category. And there's ways to automate it too, and we'll go into that a little bit further in the conversation. But there are resources that you can access that will help you monitor trends and litigation and also leaning in your network, right? I
Mhm.
know many contract attorneys. When I was onboarding to this role, I reached out to Krista and said, my primary workflow is now going to be dealing with this type of contract. Any resources that you have, please send them my way. And guess what? Krista sent them my way. And, that's what you need to do. You need to be inquisitive. You have to be proactive. You have to lean on the resources. And then you have to translate all of this data to your business partner. And in the IT and compliance realm, because it's such an evolving landscape, you really do need to make a note and a reminder yourself to read the Lexology articles and speak with the business, especially in your research and innovation category. Try to understand what product they're trying to develop so that you can understand which parameters they need to be aware of. And if you have a separate compliance department, make sure that they're following the particular compliance, privacy, and cybersecurity protocol necessary for the launch, the development, or the creation of any new product or tech.
We had a question come in around that, Crystal.
Yes.
How often should we review and update our data privacy policies and practices? Do you have a specific cadence?
The cadence really depends on the type of cybersecurity risk. You know, PII is very sensitive data and is very heavily regulated. And so you follow the industry standard. I can't speak because I'm not a SME as to what the cadence would be, but I
Mhm.
would say that you would have to make sure that at minimum on an annual basis, you're reviewing the respective policy. And if you see an update in laws and regulations in this category, that you
Mhm.
review same and that you make the updates in real time to avoid any issues down the road. And sometimes there's difficulties in interpreting these regulations because of the ambiguity. And in those instances, you can rely on external counsel. I think one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is that the hallmark of an effective in-house attorney is also their ability to navigate relationship with outside counsel and also navigating spend and advice. And so for instances where you have an IT security compliance issue that you're not necessarily familiar with, you can have that conversation with external counsel and then disseminate that data to your respective business partners. And so we will not know everything. It's one of the hallmarks also of being an in-house attorney. You're a corporate generalist. You know a little bit of everything. And the reason you're a great in-house attorney is because you know who to go to when you have certain questions. So don't be afraid to say, I'll come back to you on this question because I need to consult with my external counsel at firm X, Y, and Z. You know, there are instances where you'll have that response. It's just your obligation to do it and then come back and cascade that information in a way that's easily digestible by your business partners.
Fantastic. Krista, do you have anything to add here?
Honestly, no. I thought that was very thorough. So thanks, Crystal, for that.
You're welcome.
I have a question about outside counsel. How do you ensure alignment with your internal goals? Maybe folks on this call haven't worked extensively with outside counsel before. Is there a way that you go about that to ensure everyone's on the same page?
I am the most fun, difficult attorney to hire other attorneys. Attorneys hate having other attorneys as clients. However, when you're in private practice, you're a lot of particularly from dealing from the outside of the in-house community, you're dealing with other attorneys as your clients most often. Um, you talk about adding value to an agreement. If you've ever looked at a retainer agreement that comes from these large firms, I got an agreement recently that said, here, we're going to pay some amount of money as a retainer, which isn't that common in house. So, like, it was kind of a weird
Yeah.
thing in the first place. But then also, let's say it was for 35 hours, whatever, that if they didn't use the 35 hours, they could just keep the money. Let's not even get started. How that's probably not even in line with the rules of professional conduct. No matter where you go, right, you have to remember you're the customer. My daughter is in competitive dance, right? I remind her, studio, I am the customer. Okay. Like, I understand you have ways of doing things, right? I understand you have policies, procedures. We're glad to participate, but I am the customer. So at the end of the day, I need to be getting what I'm paying for. I have to be like, and you just have to ask for the things that you want, particularly when you're dealing with management of outside counsel. I'm very clear. I don't want billed for multiple, partners, associates, whatever on a call. Like one person per event, bill me at the highest one, whatever. But like, if you're going to put on more than one attorney on a particular call on whatever, that's on you, unless we're talking about being in court where we need multiple attorneys, and that's not very often, at least in my company. You have to feel comfortable. The best thing, like anything else in life, like a relationship, right? The more you talk about at the beginning, the more you understand and make clear your expectations and what it is that you want from it, the more likely that you'll get it. Or you'll realize this isn't the right fit. This firm is not going to fit for me. The way that they manage litigation is, I don't, same thing. I don't want a weekly summary of everything you did in the last week, right? Don't spend your time writing me a letter telling me what you did. Just do it. I'll look on the bill, or otherwise we'll already know. So you just kind of have to get into a cadence in management of outside counsel of what you want, communicating that, and remembering that you're in charge. Most of us on this call work for companies. You have leverage in your company as well. I'm not trying to say that you need to completely manipulate that sort of agreement, but that's where it starts. you have to just not blindly sign an agreement for the engagement of outside legal counsel. You have to say, like, hey, this doesn't work for me. I know this is how you guys do it, but it doesn't work for me. You're a company. You have all of the leverage in the world that you need to ask for what you want. And how do you figure out what you want, right? Goes back to, like, how do you get to know the business? It's the how, right? You have to think through it. Step out of the $750 an hour as the rate and just negotiation of that, and think of how you can actually deliver better. Instead of negotiating it to 700, think about the things that you can limit billing for. Think of how you can effectuate a better outcome that is outside of the traditional box. So for me, I know exactly the kind of lawyer that I want to hire for most matters, and I'll go and interview, and I'll look for someone that has the kind of flexibility that I'm looking for, that can deliver results in the timeline that I'm looking for, not just because they have a proven history of doing so or they have a great bio, but because, like, from the responsiveness to my call, to my questions, my concerns about the agreement, how I want to move forward, their responses, and it, to me, 100% comes back to communication and communicating expectations.
To add to that, for newer attorneys, right, who just joined in-house practice, it also depends on the reporting structure for your legal department and how formalized the use of outside counsel may be. I've been in environments where you have a budget and you have outside counsel guidelines. And so, it's necessary to review those guidelines before onboarding an attorney to understand what it is that you're able to do, what you can't put in that engagement letter, and also what your restraints are. Perhaps you have a retainer agreement, or perhaps they can bill up to a certain amount and then they have to circle back to you and revisit the rate depending on what the category is. So, in addition to securing the best fit for the type of work you're doing and your own work style, also making sure it aligns with whatever the structure and the guidelines are for your respective legal department. I know we're in more senior roles, right? Because I'm an ADC and, Krista is leading at Airbus. But if you're a newer corporate counsel or associate counsel and need to understand who you can hire and whether you yourself can hire counsel, make sure to have that conversation with your supervisor. And if you have not had that conversation and that document does not exist, just understand the parameters for engagement. Understand whether you're looking to a business partner to approve these legal spends. And if that is the case, then be prepared to explain why you want this firm over the other, because not every firm is created equal, and that's represented by their rates. But sometimes you do want to pay a little bit more to achieve the result that you want in that certain period of time.
Absolutely. We did have a question come in that I promise we'll get back to the IT and crisis management and compliance. But since we're on the topic, there was a question that came in. What approaches do you take to manage costs without compromising on the quality of legal services provided? And Crystal, you touched upon that a little bit, but is there something that you've seen from your day-to-day or your years in practice?
Yes, and so there's two or three ways that you can manage spend, and one example I'll give is litigation. In litigation, you can ask your counsel to do an estimate of the cost of pursuing litigation for a certain type of matter, as well as the industry standard for settlement costs. Sometimes it's more efficient and cost effective to explore settlement rather than pursuing the dispute in court. Obviously, there's other factors to take into consideration, such as reputational harm, and maybe you do want to spend that money, but in the event that you do not, and you want to cut costs, perhaps you want to do that settlement as a potential way to limit your legal spend and your settlement spend, because the cost of litigating in court can get very excessive. So that's one area. And then you can be strategic in your litigation if you pursue litigation. Different types of pleadings have different kinds of costs. Summary judgment has a different cost than a motion to dismiss. And depending on which stage of the suit, it may cost more to do evidence at that point rather than later on. And so there's ways to maneuver the litigation strategy to be more cost effective. Now, in terms of general compliance matters or transactional matters, you can look at what the task at hand is and you can do some of the work in-house. If some of the due diligence is something that you can do and you have the bandwidth for, that's a way to extract that cost from the cost of that transaction or deal. If you're working on a merger and you need to do due diligence in a particular category and it only entails requesting certain contracts and just reading through for certain provisions. That's something that you can do in-house. You have subject matter experts within your company. So depending on the expertise of your tax and finance departments, they perhaps can look into the tax and finance issues or even corporate governance issues rather than having the law firm do all of that for you. So, there's strategies in bringing certain things in-house that can become cost effective. And also having that really candid conversation with external counsel. Like, listen, we really want you to represent us in this suit or in this transaction. Our intent is to continue the longevity of this relationship. Is there a deal that we can work out so that we can continue to use you and your services? And most of the time they'll agree to it because they want to keep you as a client. If I have an attorney that does a great job on a transaction, I'm going to go back to that person. Why explore with a different person if you're getting wonderful results with another attorney? So, sometimes they will do that as a show of good faith and a way to maintain that relationship. So again, bringing some work in-house, having that candid dialogue, and strategizing are ways to reduce litigation and external costs.
Thank you. Moving on to a quote from Krista. Krista, can you decode this for us about crisis management and responsibility of the legal team or the legal function?
Yeah, this might be the first time I've ever been quoted in a webinar. I'll navigate this gently and not get too big of a head here. And I'll let everybody read it, but what I was trying to say when I wrote this for an article we did a couple months back, I was trying to get across the point that there is a reason that when crises arise, that the lawyers are the first call. There's a reason that when your company is on the brink of survival and going through bankruptcy, that the lawyers are the last ones around. And it's not just because they know how to do the work. There is a reason when the media picks up something that is extremely negative or affects the stock price, that the lawyers are involved in writing the statements. And yes, it is because we know the law, we know the things that are best utilized to leverage the law and that often are responsive in our industries. But it is also because we touch everything. If we go back to what we talked about a couple slides ago in the first half of the webinar, where we talked about all of the different things that legal is involved in and the various hats that we wear and all of the different departments that our roles touch, at least in most corporate in-house positions. We're the middle. We are the proverbial glue that maybe it doesn't hold everything together, but it definitely grabs a hold on every other area. So we lead the forefront in corporate strategy. We lead the forefront in crisis management. We are relationship builders with internal and external stakeholders. We translate the complex legal issues into understandable terms. We are at the forefront of adopting legal tech, practices that improve efficiency and service delivery. We ask the questions, right? We have that proximity to the business that allows us to form responsive strategy quickly or adapt quickly to changes in the business environment or regulatory landscape. We are in tune mostly because of our profession and our requirement for ongoing education to latest industry changes and things that are happening even in other industries that tangentially touch ours. We are collaborative with other departments, finance, marketing, HR, IT, having a multidisciplinary approach to strategy. And most of us have very strong business acumen, which all allows us to participate in the corporate strategy process in a way that is just different from non-lawyers in the company. So, yes, we're at the front for a reason. And if we can look at ourselves as big as our companies do, or as most companies do, then we can become untouchable in what we can deliver. And I don't mean untouchable in an unapproachable way. I mean it untouchable, like it's very hard to stop the momentum that comes from you being involved in everything. Back in 2020, when we're navigating, at my company at least, and I was part of a JV of Airbus at the time, but we're navigating the global pandemic, force majeure of every supplier that we had in our supply chain, bankruptcy of our one and only customer at the time. I was so embedded. It was like my first 6 months of the company, and I was so embedded in all of these problems that like I'm suddenly the subject matter expert in a bunch of different things, and I'm interconnected a web to every piece of the company. Not because I'm important, not because I'm great at my job. I'd like to think those things are true, but that's not it, right? It's really because we touch everything. So because we touch everything, we have that multidisciplinary approach, and we can use that best to lead a global strategy in our company, whether it's crisis management or strategic, communications.
Is there anything, Krista, that you want to add on the crisis management front?
Well, Mary, I think that this slide is pretty straightforward in the primary task that you have to do in the event of a crisis management. It's funny that Krista mentioned, bankruptcy as one of the crises. Is that was my former employer, and so having navigated the legal issues arising out of a looming bankruptcy really prepared me for crisis management and gave me the know-how to identify the necessary actions that one must take and what is successful and not in a real-time scenario. And we do have prepared. We've been talking nonstop about being preemptive rather than reactive. You want to have a game plan. And now you can never predict what a crisis will be. But if you identify your core response team and you set up a playbook as a starting point, you are way ahead of the game than other companies may be. And I think one of the keys in setting your core response team is making sure that this group is large enough to exert influence across the organization enterprise wide, but small enough in that it doesn't get messy. You want to make sure that the communications are clear, that there are persons accountable for each respective category. If it's a finance issue, then you have to go to X. If it is a privacy or cybersecurity issue, you're going to Y. Legal plays a central role within that crisis management team as that legal unifier that Krista just mentioned a few minutes ago. We are the glue and we're going to help drive things along, but we have to defer to subject matter experts occasionally depending on what the issue may be. In a bankruptcy, you're deferring to the finance team, but you're also making sure that you're fielding the lawsuits, that you're working with your PR team to make sure that there are no statements that may be used against you in litigation. You are also ensuring that any compliance issues that may arise because of defaults in agreements are being addressed or mitigated. And so, these are conversations that should be had prior to the crisis so that you can move a little bit more expediently. And that also entails having your go-to players list, right? If you have an external crisis PR team, having that on a list and making that list accessible to the rest of your business partners. If there's a firm that you go to for finance related issues, bankruptcy or the like, you have them on call and you have a point contact so you don't waste 2 or 3 days trying to locate who that person will be to represent you in any relevant litigation and communication matters. And, adaptable strategy. Again, you have to be able to pivot and to adapt according to what the situation is, and making sure that your strategy does have some flexibility is pivotal in making sure that you have a great crisis management response plan just waiting in the bushes. But hopefully you never have to go resort to it, but having it gives some peace of mind as well.
Absolutely. Sounds like preparation is key. Which brings us to our next point here about long-term planning and preparing. So Krista, I'll pass it off to you to talk through that forward thinking and long-term planning, whether it's strategies for getting more value from deals. I know you talked a little bit about that earlier, understanding the value of what you actually have going on at your organization, and then overall, how do you enhance those business ops?
Yeah, and I'm going to not go super in depth on this because I think a lot of the things that we've talked about already really all lead to this kind of summary of we already understand why it's important now, and this is just talking about the how we're doing it. So, I mean, as I step back and look at it, like there's nothing that we do as professionals that doesn't touch driving value, mitigating risk, and helping to drive the business goals forward. So like with that as the underlying premise, everything we do looking through that lens we can examine. So like just starting with your vital contracts, non-vital contracts. I've also heard like great stories from other legal professionals that have talked about like they get a staffing agreement and it's just not as hot as this huge revenue driving deal. And obviously, right? Like it's not as important. But what if that staffing agreement is going to provide the personnel that will work on that deal that's going to drive the revenue for the company? So even though maybe one's a $200 million deal and the other one you're spending $15 million, and it's very easy to prioritize that big 200 million revenue, go get a contract. If you don't have the personnel that you're going to need to actually deliver that service and earn that revenue, then it doesn't really matter. So not just looking at things from a very basic lens, right? Vital, non-vital. I always say mission critical, at least in my industry, we always talk, is this like mission critical hardware that's going to be flying on our satellites, or is this support, right? Is this like helping bring in the ground support materials that will help to assemble the satellites? But you know what? At the end of the day, if we don't have the equipment that we can use to assemble the various components of the satellite, it doesn't matter if we have the various components of the satellite in the factory because the thing still isn't going to fly. So it's just a different way of looking at it. I think the forward thinking, long-term planning, all of that is really, if it's not obvious, it's certainly something we've already touched on in this. I want to talk about understanding and managing the value of a portfolio. And this could have several different implications. This could be talking specifically about your product portfolio. It could talk about the intellectual property that's part of your portfolio. It could be very broad, but regardless of what that bullet means to you, really, to understand the value of something, you have to understand what it isn't, right? You have to understand what you don't have, what your competitors have, what your customers need. You have to understand almost more of what is not part of your portfolio to have a better understanding of the value that your particular portfolio drives and how you bring that to market. The enhancing overall business operations, for me personally, this is like a pride point for me. I love, maybe it's just because I like things that are hard. I don't know. Like I love contributing to the business operations. I think when my company is running more smoothly, even though it's more fun when there's problems, not for anybody else, but as lawyers, we love when there's problems. It's job security. It's like where all of the sexy legal work that we do comes from. Like, of course we love the problems, but when we can help drive processes, solutions, and make our businesses work more efficiently, then, I mean, there's a lot of personal just like satisfaction that comes from that. And so that's something that I really like to work through as well. So I think I'll stop there unless there's any specific questions about that, because I think we have covered it already.
Yeah, I think we are good to move on. What are some tools or strategies that everybody on this call can implement today to take back to their organizations to make their lives a little bit easier, a little bit more streamlined, because there is so much going on? Doesn't matter who starts, whoever wants to go.
Yeah, so Mary, this slide is pretty comprehensive in all the types of tools that you can use to help streamline processes, right? I think in my personal experience, I've used contract lifecycle management software and policy management software, which were really vital in serving as a central repository for the policies, SOPs, and contracts. Think in the contract arena is especially invaluable because automation of certain functions, right? You know, of the renewal reminders are key to making sure that we are not in breach in any agreements, or we are not without a contract with a particular vendor or external partner. And for policies, it's extremely important because depending on the size of your company and the amount of policies, which just in HR alone is enough to require a CLM database, it really helps take the burden off of legal and compliance to review and manually determine when each contract or each policy needs to be renewed. And so, you know, yes, there's costs associated with these tools and platforms, but the simplification of processes really help not only provide institutional knowledge, right, because of this repository, it also helps you not let anything fall in the crack. And in companies where there's a lot of turnover, or industries, right, where that are impacting financial distress, it is a lifesaver to have these platforms. Because if you're in a company where the staff is leaving or there's a lot of attrition, you won't be able to go to that person for inquiries, and all you're going to have is whatever's in the system. And so documenting who reviewed what, when a contract was executed, and when it needs to be reviewed, it's important to make sure that you're not, navigating new contracts, new territory blindly. I think that one of the benefits also to policy management repositories is understanding the different requirements that each department is facing or establishing, because sometimes there are synergies and consolidation opportunities that you would not know otherwise, not having seen it on this system, right? It's not every day that you're going to say to finance, hey, can I see every single policy that you've ever created? But there may be situations where legal and finance aligns, where you want to have visibility and perhaps consolidate certain policies internally and externally within the departments themselves. I'm not sure, Krista, if you have anything else to add to any of these great platforms that I'm looking at Mary's slide.
The big thing I would add is we wear so many hats. Like, one thing that lawyers tend to not be great at is administrative tasks. So, like, don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to come up with a PowerPoint or the Excel sheet to track all of these things. Like, there are these platforms and tools that already exist that are way better than we could ever create on our own. And I mean, we would spend 3 hours making a single PowerPoint slide when someone else can do it much more efficiently, and it would be way better, right? At least for most of us. So I think not reinventing the wheel is really important. But I mean, to tie it back to how to add value outside of traditional contracting, like, it's really, I don't want to say necessary, but it is really important to be able to track that value in both quantitative and qualitative ways. And I know we've talked about this in the past too, Mary, but really, you have to be able to measure the mark that you're leaving on the organization. And when you utilize these tools, it just makes it much easier to run those metrics.
Absolutely. I just want to go back to the measuring impact that you just were talking
Mhm.
about. I'll start with you. How do you measure impact? What are those things that you do to ensure that after all these things that you're working on, that you're actually demonstrating that you're getting them done both quantitatively and qualitatively?
Yeah, let me start with the overarching measurement stick that I will always use, and it might not be quantifiable, but it's definitely measurable. It's when the business is coming after me and chasing me down and wanting my input, when other people in my organization see that, like, hey, we really need to, like, bring Krista in for her support on this, like, or anyone on my team, frankly, right? When they're using the GC department in that way, that is the most obvious impact measuring stick that you can have, right? Because you're not, your name, but maybe your department or your role is constantly being mentioned as someone who they want to have a seat at the table. That seat has to be earned. There's a whole nother CLE we could probably do on how to earn that seat at the table, but nonetheless, like, that is the most measurable thing. But beyond that, like, yes, when we were talking about qualitative and quantitative, and starting with the quantitative first, right? We're looking at legal spend cost savings. We're looking at how long it takes us to resolve matters, how much work we do, outcomes of litigation, or how many or lack thereof of compliance related or safety related incidents that take place. When we look at some of the more qualitative things, like, to me, these are all things that matters, like, so much to me, but it's our internal and external reputation. It's how our activities are aligned with our company's strategic goals. It's process improvements and policy recognition and readaptation. It's all of the crisis management stuff that we talk. And there's a lot of ways that you can measure these, not just through, the metrics that we have in so many of these wonderful platforms, but there's benchmarking and reporting dashboards. We can, survey. But again, as I see it at the end of the day, what shows the most evidence of an impactful GC department is the fact that the stakeholders across the company want legal involved in their various matters.
I agree. I actually was thinking about this earlier because it is sometimes hard for legal to quantify and qualify their metrics, right? And a lot of it is, like Krista said, customer feedback, right? And successful outcomes. That is the most tangible metric that you can give to the business. Like, we resolved this issue, we executed these agreements for you. Legal spend is rough because it really depends about this on the season that you're in and whether or not you are hit with a lot of litigation. And litigation can depend on the industry and it can depend on certain trends. And so I would say that from the litigation perspective, showing the cost reduction and the risk mitigation and the amount of monies that could have been spent had we not done XYZ gives them a better understanding as to what the value was in that particular scenario. You know, when you hear that you get a lawsuit, it's not a happy moment, right? And monies do need to be spent. But if you show that you're being cautious in spend and intentional and the advice you're seeking and intentional in the strategies that you're employing to resolve that lawsuit, your business partners will appreciate that and again see you as a value center rather than a cost center. And again, efficiency, right? If you're letting something sit in your mailbox for extended periods of time and it's not because you're working on, five other fires at the same time, that's indicative of not having a great output as an in-house attorney for your company. So measuring your responsiveness and the ability to turn around agreements, I think, is also a way that you can demonstrate your impact as an attorney and as a business partner in your organization.
Awesome. That is all we have time for today. I do want to show a few additional resources here that everyone can access, and we'll send them out after as well. And then if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to webinars@linksquares.com. You can reach me there, and then I can triage your questions to Crystal and Krista, should you have any. But thank you, everyone. It was great to have you on the call today, and I hope you walk away with some knowledge to bring back to your organizations. And thank you, Crystal and
Thank
Krista,
you.
so much.
Thank you.